Well, welcome to the live stream. So this week we're going to have Soc from also from a developer advocate from Google Pay. But just to do a little bit of housekeeping first, just a reminder that if you go to the live stream channel, there is a discussion tab. If you've got any questions, so for example, if you sort of like an upcoming topic but you can't make the actual call, feel free to go to the live stream to the YouTube channel. And what we're doing is under the discussion tab, we're creating a new thread for every session, and so just reply to that thread, and that way the questions get associated with that thread, and we'll bring them up. But yeah, if you can avoid creating threads in the top root level thing, reply to one of the existing threads. It just helps to keep a little bit more organized. That would be great. We did have two carryover questions from last week. So last week we had Ben Kilmer from the shopping and Google Merchant Center team. There was two questions we didn't know the answer to during the call. The first one was somebody had asked, we got so many weekly sales and it's hard to keep track of the start date and end date. Can I set the sale effective date in about a year? Is that okay? And the answer is yes, you can. You can set the date range with the sale. Oh, I've got to read this out. Sale underscore price underscore effective underscore date attribute. So you can set it. It is fine to send it a long way in advance. What we'll do is we'll also add a link to the chat session. There's a Google Merchant Center page on this as well, which we'll drop into the chat session in a moment. There was also a second question. Does the provided image have to be published on the landing page? And the answer is we recommend. So the issue was that if you've got a product page, what happens if the default image that comes up on the product page is not the same as the link from the feed? And the answer is it is okay, but we recommend consistency between the ad and the landing page to provide a positive user experience. However, the title, description, and images don't always need to be identical to the content in your product page, but they should still refer to the same product. And we're going to drop another comment into the chat session in just a moment for the link for that one as well. But I just wanted to yes, so if there's any other questions, feel free to drop it on. If you've got questions after the live stream, you can also reply to the chat. We'll see all those messages as well. Yeah, but this week I wanted to invite, we've got Soc here from the Google Pay team. Would you like to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Alan. My name is Soc. I joined as a developer advocate for Google Payments roughly 10 months ago. I've relocated myself and the family from Sydney, Australia to where we live now, which is the Bay Area. And like most of you, I guess I'm also working from home. So if any kids come out interrupting, that's why. And my primary focus with Google Pay is currently the online APIs. So that's where I'm most knowledgeable. That's probably where I can provide the most help. But anything else, I'll do what I can.
Cool. So if you've got any questions, just drop them into the chat session. We'll interrupt the discussions to answer your questions, because this is what this is ultimately about. You know, to me, the success of these calls is getting people's questions answered. You can always often read the documentation, but sometimes we get the feedback that, well, if I get stuck, if I don't understand the documentation, what do I do now? And so just drop them in the chat and we will answer them. But maybe just start it off with a nice easy one. Do you want to just give an overview of what Google Pay is? Some people might not be so familiar with where it fits into the payment ecosystem.
Yeah, so Google Pay is actually a lot of things. So I guess one place is to start. One of the things that I guess Google Pay is most known for is probably the in-store payments. So when you use contactless payments in-store to make your purchases at checkout, that's one of them. The other one is, another one is enabling, it's an iOS and Android app, which allows peer-to-peer payments, which is available in some countries and regions. In addition to that, it's a payment system that's used by some of Google's own services like YouTube and the Play Store. And I guess more relevant to what it is that I do day to day, it's also a set of APIs, both available on Android and JavaScript. which allows users to securely share their details with merchants so that they can then make purchases online through web and mobile web experiences. And I guess most people will recognize Google Pay via the Google Pay button. And an important note there is you actually don't need the Google Pay app to make a purchase using Google Pay, which is a common misconception.
So if we focused, this podcast focuses more on the website side of Google Pay. So if you just talked about a normal sort of checkout flow, how would the user experience differ going through a payment with Google Pay compared to not using Google Pay?
Yeah, so I guess the Google Pay experience really manifests itself as the Google Pay button.
Mm-hmm.
So on a supported site, I guess one of the easiest ways to integrate with it is on the checkout page, instead of asking for the user's details in a form field, or perhaps in addition to, there's a Google Pay button. And when a user interacts with that, it launches what's called the payment sheet. And that payment sheet has a lot of your payment details already pre-populated from your existing payment sessions. So instead of having to type in the credit card, card name, billing and shipping address, again, all of that stuff is stored on file. And if you're an Android user, if you've used Google Pay before, a lot of these details will have already been populated for you.
Mm. And to me, that smoothness of flow, like when you're in checkout, you definitely don't want to lose the users there. And so reducing the amount of typing that people have to do, it's particularly on a mobile device, to me is a big win. Like, you just do not want to have people type in credit card details in the middle of well, I just hate it on my phone. I mean, you can do it, but it's just so painful. And so it's really...
Yeah, that's correct. It's a really painful experience, especially on a mobile phone. I guess one of the things that mobile web also affords us is probably something like Chrome Autofill. So Chrome Autofill will allow you to use saved card details, fill in the forms as well. But my personal experience with that has been a bit cumbersome, because not all forms are created equal, and then there is at least in my experience, an error rate associated with it. So I always end up having to go through, double check whether or not it's filled in the correct forms, if it's got anything missing. So one of the things that I do in addition to that is just verify one by one to make sure that the fields are filled in correctly.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the same sort of thing, that just personally, I find autofill really quite useful. But exactly what you said, I tend to find that I have to check it as well, just in case, because if a website like autofill, you've got to use the right labels and tags and all of the HTML markup, and if they've used the wrong label somewhere, you can end up with one field missing. And if it's like your second line of address and most people don't use it, it's just so frustrating. So the normal experience then is they come along, they hit the button, they would sign in or verify their sign in. Is there any other details I have to do to actually complete the purchase?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up.
I was just thinking, do they have to type in the CSV number or something or other just as an extra level? Nope.
No, they don't. So that is something that you need to do with autofill, but not with Google Pay.
Cool. And so another sort of advantage to me that if you're using Google Identity, because an unrelated area, and I'm hoping to get somebody from the identity team to join in the future, is if you use, like, for account registration, you want people to sign up. And it's surprising how hard it is to do a sign-up flow, because you get them to type in an email address and then you sort of say, well, is the email address correct? Okay, well, I'll send them a bit of email and I'll get them to click a link. And so it's actually quite a few extra steps. And so one of the things I personally think would be a good idea is using Google Identity with Google Pay, because if you've already got them logged on, you've got their details once. Google worries about all the password. They don't have to remember yet another password. And you can get the whole site flow going through quite a bit smoother as a result.
Yeah, and personally, whenever I'm doing anything that requires a sign up, I'm also looking for the Google Identity option.
Yep, cool. So thank you for the comment, Patrick. It really makes us feel special that when you say that the only reason you're here is because John Muller made you to. No, he did follow up with another comment, but welcome, Patrick. Thank you for leaving a comment. Okay, if we so as I say, if there's any questions, we're just kicking it off. But any questions about Google Pay, about accessibility, we'll do our best to either answer them live or get you answers after the call. But if you were going to compare Google Pay to, say, PayPal, how would you compare the two?
Yeah, so I guess that's a very fair comparison. They both, I guess, present as buttons on a website. So I guess Google Pay itself does go a bit beyond what PayPal does, in that it's available outside the web experience, right? But if we just park that for the purpose of this question, the similarities are they both offer web and mobile web SDKs for merchants to integrate with. They both protect customers' details by not sharing them directly with the merchants and developers in question. They're also, both available across devices. So you could use it on your mobile device, you could use it on your desktop, and all your payment details, etc., are carried over. So there are a decent number of similarities there. Some of the differences include things like being able to use it on the mobile, so Android SDK. PayPal doesn't directly offer an SDK, I believe. And unlike PayPal, Google Pay doesn't actually process the payment, it facilitates it. So that means that as a developer, if you've got an existing relationship with a payment processor, you can continue to leverage that payment processor and just use Google Pay to collect the payment details to optimize the user experience there.
Yeah, just to go into a little bit further on that one, coming into the payments, I'm sure a lot of people on the call already know exactly how how it all fits together. But do you want to just, for those who might not be so familiar with it, you talked about a payment processor there. Do you want to just expand onto that one a little bit more, just to give a bit of background for those who might not be familiar with the difference between a payment processor and like Google Pay, how the two work together?
Yeah, so a payment processor is the entity that will actually execute the payment for you. So a lot of times, it's smaller merchants or developers won't necessarily have a relationship where they can directly charge a credit card. So that's where the payment processor comes in. They'll take care of the payment processing for you. Some of them offer additional features on top, such as security and fraud checks. And in addition to that, they'll generally charge you a bit of a fee to manage some of that risk and liability. So you would generally have a processor that helps you execute the payment, so you can take payments from your customers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And so if you had an existing site and you had a payment extension, so you may already have an extension with the payment processor, it sounds like one of the things that they should do then is to see whether that payment processor supports Google Pay. So Google Pay remembers the payment details, but it then just passes those details along. Once it's verified who the user is, it passes them along for the payment processor to do, is my understanding. And so, which is different. Well, we're not really here to talk about PayPal, but it's the payment processor is someone that the merchant still has to have a relationship with in order to use Google Pay.
Yeah, that's right. And so if you've already got an existing site with a payment processor where you collecting credit card details and passing them directly to the payment processor, one of the big differences is when you integrate with Google Pay, we don't pass the raw credit card details to the developer or to the merchant, who then passes it to the payment processor. Instead, we securely capture that information, and then we pass it down as a response to the Google Pay API, which you then pass on to the payment processor. And the advantage of that is, even if the merchant is compromised, God forbid, that those payment credentials can't then be used to initiate payments elsewhere.
Yeah, and to me,
so there's an additional level of security.
Yeah, that was one of the things I actually quite liked when I first sort of learnt more about Google Pay, was that tokenization that it adds. And so the website never hits it. I come from the Magento space, and unfortunately sites do get compromised, and it's harder because if you're running your own site, you've got more responsibility. If you're running one of the SaaS vendors, you've got an expert IT team who's worrying about all that all the time. And so just avoiding getting the credit cards to your site at all, to me, is a win just in its own right. Just so you don't have to provide all those details, and it just makes it that 1 degree easier to protect your site. Cool.
Yeah. So I guess it's both beneficial to you as a developer or merchant, and also the user.
Yeah. So in terms of, would you expect, if your people wanted to adopt Google Pay on their site, and I'm going a little bit off script here, but too bad, makes it a bit more fun. I'm just trying to think, how would a developer go about, what would be the normal way to get Google Pay up and going? Would you be recommending they run off to our website to ask, learn about all the low-level APIs, or would you be trying to find an extension normally, going to the payment processors? I'm not expecting you to be an expert on all platforms, but
so with all these types of questions, the answer is it depends. So I think it depends on your existing payment processor. So if you've got Stripe, for example, Stripe's a good PSP. It provides some support for Google Pay. So Google Pay is supported in the sense that it's a supported PSP, but it requires custom integration with the Google Pay API. Stripe also offers a product called Stripe Checkout, which is a checkout page, which will give you Google Pay integration out of the box without any additional work. There's also a feature called Stripe Elements, which Google Pay isn't currently compatible with, but we are working on building that compatibility. So if you wanted to customize your checkout page, and you would usually use Stripe Elements for that, then the only option there is to integrate directly with the Google Pay APIs. And the starting point for that, hopefully we can put into the chat at some point, the stream. I don't have it off the top of my head. But then you also have some other products like Braintree, etc., who provide support for Google Pay API using their button API.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess our take on that is, if your PSP provides those APIs and it makes the integration easy, go for it. Otherwise, we've got instructions and details on how to do that with a bit of a bespoke implementation. So use your existing checkout page, add the button, and we've got documentation on how to do that.
Cool. So I actually interrupted you before when you were talking about how Google Pay sort of compares to other options on the market. Was there anything else? Sorry for taking us off track there, but was there anything else you wanted to bring up before I move on to the next question?
I think the other one is probably just looking at the reach in terms of the product itself. So it's supported across all modern browsers. It's available on mobile devices, and on Android you get a what we call a native experience, because the payment sheet is actually rendered by the operating system itself, and not it's not a pop-up window, which is common for many of the browser implementations. And also just the fact that we've got a significant number of users who are already logged on to their Google account. So interacting with Google Pay doesn't even require a sign-in as well. So it's available in just a few clicks.
Mm. I guess another one which I should have thought to add to our question list was comparing it to the web payments APIs. And my understanding of Google Pay is it provides a layer above and it will use payment request APIs when appropriate and when supported. But it actually supports more, like you've got more breadth, more coverage, and for example, my understanding of the Safari is the web payment request APIs are locked down to Apple Pay and Apple Pay only, which may deliver a better user experience. I'm not making any comment on why they've done that. But if you use the Google Pay APIs, you've actually got breadth across payment providers, even on multiple devices. You're not locked into one, which to me was useful. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so that's correct. I guess the call out there is what you said. It provides an API layer above that, so it can deal with browsers that don't support the payment request API versus ones that do.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's available, when it's applicable, the Google Pay JavaScript libraries will engage with the payment request API. So I think we'd all love to see the payment request APIs be ubiquitous and available to use everywhere. Unfortunately, that's not currently the case. So Google Pay does provide a nice abstraction layer on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We mentioned a little bit before about fees. How much does it cost to use Google Pay for a merchant?
Yeah, so Google Pay is free to both merchant and user, actually. Although one of the things to note is because Google Pay doesn't process the payment, you will need to have a relationship with the payment processor, who may then charge their own fees for handling the transaction.
Yeah. So what Google Pay is basically doing is remembering the payment information about the user and providing that across, and it's basically doing that for free. And so the user doesn't have to remember to type in their details. But yeah, we're not actually processing anything. We're not actually taking any fees, but the fees goes to your normal payment processor, who, for some reason, they want to make money. Cool.
Yeah. Go figure.
Yes. I notice Google Pay often is in store. Like you got the physical store, and like when I go to my checkout in my supermarket, there's Apple Pay and there's Google Pay quite frequently available. How does that fit into the overall picture?
So yeah, that's a good question. So as part of your device setup, one of the options is you can save a card for that type of payment. It's available in about 29 countries, so it depends on card issuers participating in that. So yeah, that's available in currently about 29 different countries. I guess technically the way it works is it grabs the card details and tokenizes it and sticks it onto your device, so it's tied to your device. And it can be used in a contactless manner, so your device needs support NFC in order to take part in that transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And if you compare that to online, so they're slightly different. With online or being used in app, the payment details let me step back actually. So with the in-store payments, that's based on the issuers, whereas online, that's based on the supported payment service providers. So we've got something like 29 countries that support the in-store payments, and we've got something like 74 countries that are available for using online.
Okay. But it's the same. I'm also thinking from the user account point of view, like everybody who set Google Pay up on their device, their mobile app to actually use in store, they will have a Google Pay account. And I assume that same account can then be used on the website. And so the same credit card details and so forth can be provided. So everybody who's starting to use it in store will also get the benefit of not having to repeat all the sign-in details online. Like provide their credit cards online.
So on that device though, so I don't think you can necessarily use the card that you added for in-store payments.
Okay.
To be able to use on your desktop, for example, because it's tied to your actual device. I know that's probably something I need to clarify.
Cool.
I think that's the case.
Okay. Do I get the Google Pay? Would I I'm thinking about a website, and we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier on actually. But the question was around: should I be looking for Google Pay extensions, or should I be looking for like the Stripe extension and putting Stripe on the store on my website? Do you think it makes much difference which way you'd be going between the two?
Are you talking about from a user experience perspective or developer?
I'm talking about like a merchant or a developer, and they want to get Google Pay on their website. Should they be looking for a Google Pay extension, do you think? Or should they be looking for their checking first to see if their payment provider, they might already have an extension from their payment provider. It may have Google support in it. Is there any recommended approach? Like, how would they identify the extension? Like, most e-commerce sites these days are on a platform. Most of them have extensions. So the most likely way they're going to get Google Pay up and going is to get an extension. Now, we can't list out every single platform here on the call, and we're not going to list out particular extensions on the call. But if they wanted to track it down, what would be the process, if you like, for them to try and work out how to get Google Pay up and going?
Yeah, so with the e-commerce platforms, the best path forward is to actually use your existing payment extension and see if it's got support for Google Pay. We are pretty light in terms of having extensions in those marketplaces to use. One shout out is we are releasing a Magento extension soon. It's still most of the work's been done. I think it's just gone through the process of getting published.
Okay,
so
cool.
That's something to call out there.
So that
So that's kind of us just testing the waters when it comes to extensions. The Magento extension itself will support, I think it's 8 different PSPs. So it won't have coverage of all the PSPs, but we're testing the waters of 8.
Okay, cool. No, that was going to be my next question, is because it seems like you still got to pick a payment service provider. So the Magento extension is actually going to have a whole heap built in. So you just get the Google extension. It'll be our recommended experience. But there's nothing wrong with also going, if your payment provider is also extensions got Google support, it might be an option to turn on. There is no real difference from our point of view. They'll still get the same, hey, if you're logged on to Google, great, I can provide all your payment details. Both paths work. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so if the extension already supports it, go for it.
Yeah. Just a reminder for anybody listening in, feel free to drop any questions on the chat. You're absolutely welcome. But let's keep going then. So we already talked about the security aspect of Google Pay, that the fact that it's tokenized, and so the credit card details don't go through to the site ever. And we've actually also talked about the next question already, which was about integrating Google Pay and versus Autofill. So if you're going to, jumping on to the next question then, Google Pay in terms of shipping details, because like another thing that's actually a pain, like in terms of going through the checkout flow, is, I've got to ask the user for their address. So step number 1, you've got to ask them for the credit card details. Another step is to ask for the shipping details. Does Google Pay help with the shipping details?
Yeah, so Google Pay will keep track of the address details that you've entered previously, and they're available for users to choose from. So as a developer, one of the things that you need to tell the API is that you are interested in shipping details. And what that will do is it'll present the payment sheet with an option to specify shipping details. And that can be a list of existing shipping details or addresses, really, addresses that you've previously entered into Google Pay. Or there's also the option to add a new one, so specify a different shipping address.
Yeah, and to me, it's another one of those friction points, particularly for somebody on mobile. First, they've got to enter all their credit card details, and next they've got to enter all their shipping details. So Google Pay is one way to reduce that amount of data entry that a user has to do. And to me, it's not only reducing the data entry effort, it's just more likely to be correct. Because if it's very easy to do a typo the next time you come along and sort of like, I just missed one digit off the street number. or that no, it didn't register correctly, or one of my favorites is always auto uncorrect, where it sort of thinks it's got a better idea of what your street name should be than what you actually typed in, and so forth. Cool. Is there any other
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. Is there any other benefits you can think of, like any other topics that we haven't covered that you think might be, make it interesting to consider Google Pay on your site?
Well, you recently just brought up autofill, and I guess the one of the questions that would get asked a bit is, well, why integrate with Google Pay if autofill does the job?
Mm-hmm.
And and it's a good question. And the thing is, it's not a either or. So autofill will, or I should say, the card detail fields in a form, the address fields, they're all required anyway. They kind of go hand in hand. So they complement one another. It's just if you wanted to provide an easier checkout experience, that's available to users in as few as 2-3 clicks. The advice is to do that because of the additional benefits it provides for user experience, which would then lead to higher conversions.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I've got to the end of my particular question. So if anybody is on the chat, if you've got any questions, now is a good time, because we will probably end this a bit early today. So if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in there. But if I just gave an overview of my understanding of what you said, and then you can just confirm whether I've got it all right. Google Pay is effectively, from a website, from a merchant operating their own e-commerce website, it's effectively another JavaScript library that they would be using as part of the checkout flow. They'd be hooked on, you'd have a Google Pay button on the site. It will then prompt the user to log on if they're not already logged on. If they're already logged on, it'll be quite a seamless flow to get through. From that, it will supply their details, but it's sent in an encrypted form through to the website as effectively a tokenized form. That then gets sent through to the merchant's existing payment processor. So the payment processor has to have a relationship with Google Pay, because we've got to at least agree on that encryption format, for example. That avoids the need for the user having to type in the details. To me, that protects the site somewhat, because you can't do nasty JavaScript things to try and keyboard, oh, well, yes, you are talking to PayPal site. Well, it looks like the PayPal site. But if you're actually using Google Pay, it won't even be asking you for the credit card details. So you won't be getting that sort of information going through to the site at all. Once you've then got the payment processing, it uses, the payment request API where possible, but it provides ubiquity across multiple platforms, so you're not tied to the payment request API. From there, you can then, you've got the payment processing. It also has got the shipping details, and so it reduces the amount of typing a user has to do. Again, particularly good on mobiles. You can use autocomplete, but to me it provides a more a reliable way of getting that detail across, because they've typed it in, they've made sure it's right once, and then they can just reuse those details over and over. That then, to actually get it up on a site, you've really got, it's almost like you've got 3 options. One is there may be a Google extension with Google Pay support. There's one coming in particular for Magento. Well, we'll see how popular that one is. There is many of the payment processors have built-in support, so there may be an option where you can turn it on for your site. You could go check that one. You can, of course, use the low-level APIs, and that might be more relevant if you're got a DIY site. Like if you're actually building the site, and I'm thinking for a larger organization, if they're not actually using a platform provider, they would actually go off and use the APIs directly. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, that's right. One thing to add as well is if there is a payment provider that you're using that isn't supported, there's a couple ways to go about adding support.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those is actually requesting, that type of support. So what happens there is we'll reach out to the payment provider and try and build up that partnership. One other option is to kind of go it alone. So you have the direct integration with, say, a payment gateway instead of the payment provider. In that case, we'll set up a relationship between Google Pay and the developer to securely share, public and private keys so that we can encrypt it and send it over. It's possible, but it's not necessarily recommended because there's a bunch of obligations required, particularly in terms of PCI DSS compliance, and there's additional overhead required. So, for example, we will set up the public and private keys, but they need to be rotated every 12 months, for example. And then just the ongoing compliance obligations that come with that.
The other one, I guess, is people should be aware of is Google Pay isn't available in every country yet, and so I assume they should go to the website, to the Google Help Center, to work out, just to verify that the countries that they are in are supported by Google Pay. Is there a better source or any other advice on that one?
No, so best source is the list of countries online. Hopefully we'll make a link available soon. And I guess the thing to note there is that the supported countries are more tied to the users rather than the shops.
Right.
So if you're if you're in a country that doesn't provide Google Pay experience, then that won't be available for you to use.
Okay. And this is not a technical question, but just on that one, is that because of there's and you may not know, but is it because of like financial regulations, I assume, in different countries you've got to go through various approvals when dealing with finances?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that.
Yeah, I could well believe it because I certainly know, because I used to be at eBay when we're part of the eBay and PayPal, and it's sort of like every time you go to a new country, you've got to make sure that you're in line with all the regulations, and so there's just a whole heap of legalese to sort of say, no, I'm not officially a bank because I'm not actually holding any funds for people, and versus, oh, but we're providing a loan offering. This was more at the PayPal side, and so there was you had to go through a whole heap of legalese per country just to work out, to make sure you're abiding by all the local laws. So to me, that actually makes a lot of sense. Google Pay may not have the same breadth, but it does more things in some areas and less in others. And so just trying to work out all the legalese sometimes takes quite a bit of effort. Cool.
Yeah, that could very well be the case.
Yeah. Is there any other thing? Otherwise, that was the end of my questions. So very last chance, if anybody in the chat session's got any questions about Google Pay, feel free to drop them in. If not, go to the discussion area. There's a thread for this particular session over in the discussion area. Feel free to leave it on the chat and we'll reply to that comment later on. But otherwise, is there any final questions or not questions? No, you don't get to ask me questions. But Soc, any information, any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, nothing comes to mind.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining this call. It's been great to get some more information, and I will leave it there then. So thank you for everybody who's joined the call. As I said, if you're watching the video afterwards, feel free to drop a comment in the discussion section of the YouTube channel, and just drop a comment there. We'll see the comments and we'll get an answer back to you in the near future. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining. Take care.